one of the biggest misconceptions people carry when dealing with someone emotionally distant is this: they pulled away because I wasn't enough. That single thought has destroyed more confidence, more peace, and more self-worth than any breakup ever could. But here's the truth. The reason avoidants pull away isn't about you at all. It's about them. It's about the silent fear that's been sitting inside them long before you ever showed up. Avoidants aren't heartless. They're scared, not of you, but of connection. See, connection requires vulnerability. It means letting someone see behind the walls, the masks, the control. And that's terrifying for someone whose entire emotional safety has been built on distance. Somewhere in their past, maybe in childhood, maybe through painful relationships, they learned that love equals loss, closeness equals danger, and needing someone equals weakness. So they built their armor out of avoidance. They tell themselves, if I don't get too close, I can't get hurt. But here's the paradox. The more they try to protect themselves from pain, the more pain they actually create. They crave intimacy, but they fear it. They want to be understood, but they sabotage it. And when someone like you comes along, someone open, emotionally intelligent, genuinely invested, their defense mechanisms kick in automatically. It's not that they don't feel something real. It's that feeling something real threatens the identity they've built to survive. Think of it like this. Imagine someone who's lived their whole life in a dimly lit room. Then suddenly, someone opens the curtains. The light floods in. It's beautiful, warm, revealing, but it also hurts their eyes. They flinch. They pull the curtains shut again. Not because the light was bad, but because it was too much too soon. That's what it feels like for avoidants when genuine emotional connection enters their world. They confuse safety with solitude because solitude has always been predictable. Now, when you understand that, when you really get that their silence, their withdrawal, their mixed signals have nothing to do with your worth, everything changes. You stop internalizing their behavior as rejection. You stop chasing validation in places that can't offer it. Instead, you start to see it for what it is: an emotional pattern that existed long before you arrived, and one you can't fix by loving them harder. And that realization is powerful, because the moment you stop personalizing their distance, you take back your energy. You reclaim the emotional balance that was quietly slipping away every time you overanalyzed a text or replayed a conversation in your head. You start to detach, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You understand that your role was never to rescue them from their fears, but to recognize your own value in the face of them. The human instinct is to chase what pulls away, to seek answers, to fix, to prove. But wisdom lies in restraint. When someone's pattern is avoidance, their healing won't come from being pursued. It comes from being confronted with the silence they created. Your calm becomes their mirror. Your detachment forces them to face their discomfort, and that's something no amount of pleading or explaining could ever achieve. There's a deeper philosophical layer here too, the idea that we often project our deepest wounds onto others. The avoidant fears abandonment, so they abandon first. The anxious fears rejection, so they cling tighter. Both are responses to the same underlying wound, the fear of being unworthy of love. When you see it through that lens, the dynamic stops feeling personal and starts feeling human. You're no longer the victim of their withdrawal. You're the observer of a universal pattern of protection and pain. So instead of asking, why did they pull away from me? Ask, what was my lesson in this? Because sometimes the purpose of these connections isn't to last, it's to wake you up, to teach you that love without boundaries is self-abandonment, that empathy without discernment becomes self-harm, and that you can understand someone's pain without making it your responsibility to heal it. When you shift from taking their avoidance personally to viewing it compassionately but objectively, you set yourself free. You stop being a participant in their emotional chaos and start being a witness to your own strength. And ironically, that's the exact moment when avoidants begin to feel the loss, not because you're gone, but because your absence is no longer rooted in pain. It's rooted in peace. So remember this, their distance was never a reflection of your inadequacy. It was a symptom of their fear. You were not too much. You were simply more than they were ready to receive. And the closing truth is this: when you stop chasing what's running from itself, you stop running too. That's when you finally come home, not to them, but to you. There's a fascinating psychological shift that happens the moment you stop chasing someone who's emotionally unavailable. It's almost invisible at first, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. You pull your energy back, you stop trying to prove your worth, and suddenly, the entire dynamic between you and the avoidant begins to shift. What was once their comfort zone, being pursued, being in control, starts to feel strangely unsettling to them. And this is where the power begins to change hands. Avoidants live in a mental framework where distance equals safety. As long as they feel like someone else is chasing, they can maintain emotional control. They get to decide when to engage, when to withdraw, when to open up just enough to keep you hoping. It's a subconscious strategy to regulate their anxiety. But what most people don't realize is that this power only exists when you give it to them. When you stop chasing, that illusion crumbles. The moment you step back, you're no longer playing the role they expected you to play. They can't predict your reactions, can't rely on your validation to feed their sense of control. Suddenly, the silence they once used as a weapon becomes a mirror they're forced to look into. They start wondering, why aren't you calling? Why aren't you checking in? Why aren't you still trying to win them over? And that curiosity, that discomfort, is the beginning of their realization. Because here's the thing, avoidants aren't as indifferent as they appear. They feel deeply, but they've learned to suppress those feelings to survive. They convince themselves they don't need anyone, but underneath that story is a quiet fear of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant. When you keep chasing them, you confirm their worldview. I can pull away, and they'll still be there. But when you withdraw gracefully, not in anger, not in manipulation, just in self-respect, you interrupt their narrative. You create emotional tension, and human beings, by nature, are drawn to resolve tension. That's why detachment is so powerful. Not the cold, bitter kind where you're pretending not to care. I'm talking about authentic detachment, the kind that comes from peace, from genuinely understanding that your value isn't determined by someone's attention span. When you reach that point, your energy changes. You're no longer seeking, you're centered, and energy like that is magnetic. Think about how you feel around people who are calm and grounded. You're drawn to them, right? You trust them. They feel solid, secure, like they don't need your approval to exist. That's what emotional detachment does. It restores your sense of gravity. And avoidants who are used to emotional chaos subconsciously crave that stability even though they run from it. It's the law of emotional polarity. The one who needs less always has more influence. Not because it's a game, but because emotional independence breeds respect. You can't make someone miss you through pressure or pleading. You can only do it through peace. And here's the deeper layer. When you stop chasing, you start noticing your own patterns too. You start asking the hard questions. Why was I chasing in the first place? What part of me needed their validation so badly that I kept ignoring the red flags? That self-inquiry is where true empowerment begins. Because this isn't just about them missing you. It's about you remembering yourself. When you step back, two things happen simultaneously. They start to see what they've lost, and you start to see what you were giving away. And that's a profound reversal of power. Suddenly, you realize that your worth was never dependent on their recognition. It was there all along. The difference is, now you believe it. You can almost picture it like a pendulum. For a while, all the energy swings toward them. Your thoughts, your emotions, your focus. But when you stop chasing, the pendulum naturally swings back. The emotional field rebalances. And often, that's the exact moment they start to feel your absence. Not just physically, but energetically. They sense the void where your attention used to be, and that absence echoes louder than any words ever could. This is not about manipulation. It's about equilibrium. It's about recognizing that relationships are energy exchanges. And when one person keeps giving while the other keeps taking, the system collapses. The only way to restore balance is by stepping out of the imbalance, by refusing to feed what drains you. The irony is that the moment you stop needing their attention is the exact moment they begin to crave yours. But by then, something in you has changed. You're not waiting anymore. You're not hoping they'll come back as proof of your worth. You've already proven it to yourself through your own peace, through your restraint, through your ability to let go without losing yourself. And that's what truly shifts the dynamic. Not power games, not silence as punishment, but silence as self-respect. The quiet confidence that says, I'm not going to chase love. I'm going to become the kind of person who attracts it effortlessly. So if you ever find yourself wondering when they'll start to miss you, remember this: they'll start missing you when your absence feels stronger than your presence used to. When your calm becomes their chaos. When your peace exposes their instability. Because the truth is simple but profound: the one who stops chasing becomes the one who's remembered. There comes a moment, and it's almost always after you've stopped waiting for it, when the avoidant starts to feel something they can't easily name. It's not instant regret. It's not even nostalgia. It's that quiet, unsettling realization that you weren't the threat they imagined. You were the safe space they didn't know how to handle. That's the turning point. That's when avoidants start to miss you, not because you're gone, but because they finally see what your presence really meant. Avoidants spend so much of their lives protecting themselves from intimacy that they mistake peace for boredom, consistency for predictability, and emotional safety for emotional danger. They crave connection, but the moment it shows up, calm, steady, nurturing, it clashes with their internal chaos. They don't know what to do with it. They've been conditioned to equate love with volatility, passion with instability, and attention with manipulation. So when someone shows them the opposite, presence without pressure, affection without agenda, their nervous system doesn't recognize it as love. It registers it as risk. That's why they pull away. It's not rejection, it's confusion. Their emotional blueprint is wired to expect inconsistency. When you show up with emotional maturity and steady warmth, it disrupts that wiring. You challenge their story. The story that says people always leave, love always hurts, and vulnerability always leads to loss. So they run. They retreat to the only environment that feels familiar: solitude. But here's where it gets interesting. Solitude doesn't heal them. It exposes them. At first, they feel relief. Space gives them control again. They tell themselves they needed distance, that it was the right decision. But slowly, the silence starts to shift. The peace they feel at first begins to feel empty. The distraction that once numbed them starts to fade. And that's when the truth begins to surface. They start to remember, not the drama, not the tension, but the stability, the softness, the way they could exhale around you without realizing it. That's the emotional moment of realization. It doesn't happen in the noise of arguments or the chaos of separation. It happens in the stillness, those quiet nights, the unguarded moments, when they catch themselves missing not just you, but who they were when they were with you. Because that's the real connection. It's not about what you gave them. It's about the version of themselves your presence allowed them to be. And here's the irony: what they once ran from becomes the thing they crave. When the distractions stop working, when temporary connections fall flat, they start to see the difference between comfort and compatibility, between attention and connection. That's when the memory of you stops being a background thought and starts being a haunting truth. That they pushed away something real because it scared them more than being alone ever could. There's something deeply human about that realization. It's the moment when self-protection turns into self-reflection. When someone realizes that what they were avoiding wasn't love itself, but the vulnerability that love demands. Because real love, healthy love, doesn't feed your ego, it confronts your fears. It asks you to open, to soften, to trust. And for an avoidant, that's terrifying. But eventually, the loneliness they were trying to escape by staying detached becomes louder than the fear itself. And that's when they start missing you. Not the version of you they idealized or the version they projected, but the grounded, safe, steady energy that made them feel seen. They remember the way you didn't demand, the way you understood without forcing conversation, the way your presence made things make sense. And in that memory, they start to confront the truth they avoided all along. That real connection isn't found in freedom from others, it's found in the courage to stay. This is why your silence, your absence, carries more weight than your words ever could. Because now, the space you left behind is filled with their own reflection. They're finally sitting in the stillness they once claimed to need, realizing that solitude isn't freedom when what you really miss is the person who made you feel safe in your own skin. But here's what matters most for you. That realization, that awakening they experience, isn't your responsibility to wait for. It's not your job to hold space for their epiphany. The purpose of this truth isn't to feed your hope that they'll come back. It's to remind you that you were the safe space, the calm, the peace, and that says something about your strength, not their absence. Because the real win here isn't when they finally recognize your value. It's when you stop needing their recognition to confirm it. When you can look back, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the lesson that love given from security will always outlast love built on fear. So when that moment of realization comes, for them, not you, let it. Let them face the truth in their own silence. Because while they're finally learning what you were, you've already moved on to become everything they couldn't be ready for. And here's the closing truth to carry with you. Sometimes people only recognize peace when they lose the person who gave it to them. But your healing begins when you realize you were the peace all along. There's something no one really talks about when it comes to emotional connection. And it's this: every meaningful bond leaves behind an energetic imprint. You can't see it, but you can feel it. It lingers in the silence after someone leaves, in the places where your laughter used to echo, in the small, almost imperceptible ways you changed each other. That's what avoidants eventually run into. Not just memories, but the energetic gravity of what they lost. And no matter how far they go, they can't outrun that kind of pull. Avoidants are experts at distraction. When they pull away, they fill the space immediately. New hobbies, new people, new noise. They do it to drown out the emotional residue that connection leaves behind. But here's the catch: distraction can't erase emotional truth. It only delays it. Because eventually, when the novelty wears off and the silence returns, the energy they tried to escape seeps back in. See, what you gave them wasn't just your presence. It was a different frequency of being. You showed up authentically, consistently, without pretending. You brought calm into their chaos, and whether they could admit it or not, their nervous system started to adjust to that. Your energy regulated theirs. That's why, even after they leave, even after they convince themselves they've moved on, they start to feel that strange emotional echo. A kind of longing they can't explain. It's not about missing your texts or your voice or the way you smiled. It's about missing the state they experienced around you. The peace, the acceptance, the sense of being seen without needing to perform. That's emotional gravity. It's the invisible force that draws people back to what feels true after they've exhausted everything that isn't. And that's why you can't compete with distractions. You don't need to. Because real energy doesn't fade. It just waits. It sits quietly in their subconscious while they chase temporary highs. They'll meet new people who spark excitement, who make them feel alive for a while, but it won't last. Because excitement isn't connection. Attention isn't understanding. And no matter how many new faces they encounter, they'll keep coming back to that same internal feeling. The calm they only knew with you. There's a philosophical truth here too. In a world obsessed with stimulation, peace becomes addictive. At first, people run from it because it feels unfamiliar, but over time, they realize it's the only thing that sustains them. That's the paradox the avoidant faces. They crave freedom, but end up missing the very stability they pushed away. The gravity of emotional authenticity always pulls harder than the thrill of temporary distraction. You've probably felt this in your own life, too. Think about someone who left an imprint on you, not because they were dramatic or exciting, but because they were real. That person stays with you, not in your mind, but in your energy. You feel them in moments of stillness. That's what happens to the avoidant. Your presence becomes part of their internal rhythm. You taught their nervous system what safety feels like, and once someone experiences that, it's impossible to fully forget it. But here's where your power lies. You don't have to do anything to make them feel it. You don't have to send a message, post a quote, or prove your growth. The energetic impact of authenticity doesn't require maintenance. It simply exists. Your calm speaks louder than any contact ever could. And this is the part that most people miss. Emotional gravity works both ways. The more you heal, the more grounded you become, the stronger your energy grows. It's not about pulling anyone back. It's about becoming so aligned with peace that nothing chaotic can hold on to you anymore. You shift the polarity. Instead of orbiting around someone who can't meet you emotionally, you become the center of your own orbit. Balanced, steady, radiant. When that happens, the avoidant starts to feel the distance not as relief, but as loss. Because they can sense that your energy, the one they took for granted, is no longer accessible to them. It's not waiting. It's not chasing. It's evolved. And that's what makes the absence so profound. They're not missing who you were. They're missing the energy that once held space for them, and realizing that space no longer exists for them anymore. So you don't have to wish for their regret. You don't have to hope for their awakening. Life has a way of revealing what's real and what's replaceable. Distractions fade. Temporary connections dissolve. But emotional gravity, the kind rooted in truth, compassion, and calm, always calls people back to awareness. And maybe they will come back. Maybe they won't. But either way, your role isn't to wait, it's to rise. Because while they're out there chasing noise, you're mastering stillness. And stillness, that inner calm, that grounded energy, is where your real power lives. So let them orbit, let them wander. The truth always finds its way home. And when it does, it won't be to chase what you were. It'll be to remember what they lost. The closing truth is simple. You don't need to pull anyone back into your energy field. The ones meant for you will always feel the gravity of your peace. Because real energy doesn't chase, it attracts. There's this moment in every healing journey when something subtle but life-changing happens. You stop caring whether they miss you. It's not that you stop feeling, it's that the emotional charge begins to dissolve. You start to realize that your peace, your growth, your energy are far too valuable to keep anchored in someone else's avoidance. That's the real shift. Because contrary to what we've been conditioned to believe, healing isn't about getting them back. It's about getting you back. Avoidants often start missing you right at the point when you stop needing them to. Not because of irony or karma, but because emotional detachment rewrites the entire power dynamic. When you stop chasing, they lose control. When you start healing, they lose access. And it's not because you've closed your heart. It's because you've finally learned to open it inward. The truth is, healing is the real revenge. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's quiet, consistent, and incredibly powerful. Healing means your self-worth no longer depends on someone's recognition. It means your boundaries are no longer negotiable. It means your love for yourself becomes louder than your longing for someone who couldn't meet you halfway. When you start to heal, you shift your focus from external validation to internal alignment. You stop asking, "Why did they leave?" and start asking, "What did I learn about myself through this?" You stop replaying what you could have done differently and begin to recognize what you'll never tolerate again. And that shift, that reorientation toward your own growth, changes everything, not just your mindset, but your energy, your presence, your entire emotional signature. Avoidants feel that shift. They might not understand it consciously, but they sense it. Because the version of you that once absorbed their distance, that once over-explained, overextended, and overgave, doesn't exist anymore. You've evolved past the dynamic that kept them comfortable. And when the dynamic changes, their control dissolves. Suddenly, the space they once used to retreat becomes a void they can't fill. Healing isn't glamorous. It's not about pretending you're fine or forcing positivity. It's about sitting with the pain until it loses its hold. It's about rewriting your own emotional conditioning. The part of you that thought love required self-sacrifice. It's about learning to love yourself in the ways you kept hoping someone else would. That's where true transformation happens. When you start investing that energy back into yourself, into your growth, your goals, your health, your purpose, something remarkable happens. You stop orbiting around their avoidance. Your world expands beyond them. You start seeing your value in new ways, not as someone trying to prove they're worth staying for, but as someone who knows they're worth choosing, even if it means choosing themselves. And ironically, that's often when the avoidant begins to notice you again, because you're no longer emotionally available in the same way. You're not sending out the same signals. Your energy isn't needy, it's neutral. You're not performing emotional labor for two anymore. And that neutrality, that calm self-possession, is magnetic. It draws attention because it radiates something rare peace without pretense. But here's the truth: by the time they realize it, you won't want to go back. Because growth changes your appetite. Once you've tasted your own power, your own clarity, your own peace, you can't unlearn it. You can't unfeel the freedom of not needing someone else to complete you. You stop wanting to be someone's almost. You stop waiting for breadcrumbs when you can bake the whole damn loaf yourself. The real glow up isn't about appearance. It's about energy. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs validation to feel valuable. It's the peace that comes from no longer chasing what's running from itself. And when avoidants feel that, it's disorienting, because they can't access you anymore. They can't trigger you. They can't control the narrative. They can't use your emotions as proof of their importance. Your silence becomes powerful. Your absence becomes the message, because now you're not disappearing to manipulate them. You're disappearing because you've reappeared for yourself. You've learned that closure isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself when you decide that your healing matters more than their recognition. The beautiful irony is that when they finally start missing you, they're not missing the version of you they left behind. They're missing the version of themselves that existed in your calm, nurturing presence. But by then, your story has already evolved. You've stepped into the next chapter, one where your peace is the priority, your growth is the focus, and your love is directed towards something sustainable you. So if you're in that phase right now, if you're in the middle of rebuilding, relearning, recentering, don't rush it. Healing isn't linear, but it is liberating. Every time you choose peace over chaos, boundaries over approval, and self-respect over desperation, you're not just healing from them. You're healing generations of patterns that taught you to chase love instead of become it. And that's the moment they truly feel your absence. Not when you're gone, but when you've grown. So remember, this healing doesn't need witnesses. Your transformation will speak for itself. Because the loudest revenge, the deepest closure, and the most undeniable power always come from one thing: living in a way that makes your past self proud. At some point, the truth always catches up, not as an explosion, but as an echo. For the avoidant, that echo is the moment they realize you weren't the problem. You were the mirror. You reflected back everything they couldn't yet face in themselves: their fear of intimacy, their need for control, their unhealed wounds disguised as independence. When that realization hits, it doesn't just sting. It dismantles the narrative they've been living in. Because the truth, when it finally arrives, always exposes what denial tried to protect. Avoidants spend most of their relationships trying to outrun discomfort. They tell themselves they're better off alone, that they just don't need much, that they're more rational than emotional. It's their way of justifying distance. But distance is a defense mechanism, not a personality type. It's what happens when someone hasn't yet learned how to be safe in closeness. They confuse control with security. They call avoidance peace, when really it's just the absence of vulnerability. And when someone like you enters their life, emotionally aware, open, grounded, it confronts that illusion. You didn't demand too much. You revealed how little they were giving. You didn't scare them off. You simply showed them what emotional maturity looks like. And for someone who's spent their life surviving through detachment, that's terrifying. So they withdraw, they rationalize, they rewrite the story to protect their ego. But eventually life makes them face the truth that running from connection doesn't make the fear go away. It just deepens the loneliness. Here's where it gets interesting when they start to miss you. It's not nostalgia. It's confrontation. They're not just remembering you. They're remembering the parts of themselves that only surfaced around you. The version of them that felt calm, seen, curious, connected. Because love, real love, doesn't just show us who someone else is. It reveals who we are capable of being. And when they lose that, it's not just the loss of a relationship. It's the loss of a mirror that made them aware of their own emotional potential. That's why the truth hurts so much when it lands. Because it's not about regret over what happened. It's about the recognition of what they weren't ready to sustain. But to realize they didn't push you away because of your flaws. They pushed you away because your presence demanded honesty. Your calm made their chaos visible. Your consistency highlighted their avoidance. You didn't make them feel small. You made them aware of how small they were living. But the truth doesn't come in a dramatic moment. It comes in quiet ones. When they're scrolling through old photos or sitting in a space where your energy used to fill the air, or having a conversation with someone new who doesn't make them feel what you did. The realization creeps in slowly. You weren't the problem. Their avoidance was. And this is the part that's both empowering and liberating for you. That realization isn't your victory to witness. It's theirs to live with. You don't need to hear the apology or the confession or the late night text. Because by the time they reach that truth, you've already moved beyond needing their acknowledgement. You've already accepted that closure doesn't come from someone else's awareness. It comes from your own understanding. There's a philosophical beauty in that. When you stop needing external validation for your pain, you reclaim authorship over your story. You're no longer the abandoned, the rejected, the one who wasn't enough. You become the catalyst, the person whose presence forced another soul to meet their shadow. And that's a role few people ever get to play. It's not easy. It's not glamorous, but it's sacred. Because every relationship, especially the painful ones, serves a purpose in your evolution. Avoidance missing you is not the point of arrival. It's a side effect. It's the emotional consequence of your growth, not the goal of it. And the irony is, when they finally wake up to what they lost, you'll be standing somewhere entirely different. Not bitter, not waiting, just peaceful. You'll see the whole story differently, not as a wound, but as a lesson. You'll realize that love didn't fail you. It taught you. Because every connection has a mirror function. It shows you where you're still healing, and it shows them what they're still running from. And once you've faced your side of the mirror, once you've taken accountability for your patterns, healed your attachment wounds, learned to stand grounded in your worth, their side of the mirror becomes irrelevant. You can wish them well without wanting them back. You can release them without resentment because you've extracted the meaning from the pain. And that's the most powerful place you can ever reach. When missing you becomes their mirror, and your peace becomes your proof. Proof that you've done the work. Proof that you've evolved. Proof that love, even when it ends, can still transform you into someone wiser, freer, and infinitely more whole. So the next time you find yourself wondering whether they miss you, remember this: missing you is not your validation. It's their awakening. And your only job now is to stay awake in your own life. Because the final truth is this: you don't need to be remembered to be free. You just need to be at peace with what you've become.